Good afternoon. Welcome to the final speaking session. If you could take your seats, and if I could encourage people to make sure their mobile phones, their cell phones, are switched off or silent. That would be very kind. Well, we have an incredibly important and large subject, which would be very daunting, except that we have tremendous expertise on the panel for this last session. So we're very fortunate to have, needing no introduction, Senator Lieberman, who you all know from his distinguished Senate career and his runs for the presidency and vice presidency. We have Assistant Secretary Kurt Campbell, one of the great Asia experts in the United States. We have Graham Allison, Director of the Belfer Center at Harvard and the School of Government. We have Richard Bush, a Senior Fellow at the Brookings Institution and one of the great experts on East Asia, particularly things like Taiwan. And then finally we have our host for the conference, Dr. Harm Chaibong from the Asan Institute. And I'm going to ask them to speak in the order working down from Senator Lieberman across the panel. And because I'm very keen to take as many questions as possible and allow it to be sort of interactive, I've encouraged our speakers to keep to between 5 and 7 minutes, and I shall attempt to be somewhat ferocious in my timekeeping. So, Senator Lieberman, if I could ask you to speak. And just before I speak, the other thing is, it is such a large subject and such an important region that I was going to encourage the panelists perhaps to imagine that they were briefing a leader from one of the countries in this region to get that sense of really the biggest possible issues, and perhaps to think about the status quo, how stable is it, how sustainable is it, and then some of the things that could go wrong in East Asia, and then how could it go right. So somewhere within that sort of framework, I'm sure that the audience is keen for the biggest possible sort of issues in that 30,000-foot perspective. So, Senator, please, you have the floor.
Thanks, David, and thanks to the Asan Institute for inviting me and for sponsoring this. Let me just say that this institute has attained extraordinary credibility in just its 5 years of existence and is really turning out research products and policy statements that are as good as anything being done by anybody in Washington or anywhere else. So I'm honored to be here. Second, you take a certain risk by asking a former senator to speak, because I've lost now my right to filibuster. And having an audience, I'm tempted, and to put me in 5 to 7 minutes, usually we don't say hello in less than 7 minutes. But I'm going to try to briefly to abbreviate my remarks so we can have questions and answers. There's a lot to celebrate in this 60th year of the U.S.-ROK alliance, and there's really an enormous amount to celebrate in the last 60 years of South Korean history. The truth is that no country better embodies the absolute best of the changes that have occurred in the world and in Asia in its rise from poverty to prosperity and from dictatorship to freedom than South Korea. I do want to stress briefly that for all the changes that have occurred, and they are remarkable, the spread of freedom throughout the region, the rise of literally hundreds of millions of people out of poverty into the middle class and beyond, that it's important, I think, for us to note, perhaps at a higher level, as David asked, that some things haven't changed. One is that the foundation for peace and freedom and prosperity in Asia is the alliance system that the United States built after World War II, and that we have sustained with like-minded democratic allies, including particularly South Korea. Another thing that hasn't changed is not just the existence of that alliance, but the purpose and the values of the alliance, which has not been to accrue power for its own sake, but to uphold what I would call a liberal international order in which countries can trade freely because freedom of navigation is safeguarded and aggression is deterred, or if necessary, countered directly. What also hasn't changed, in fact it's grown stronger, is the dependence of the U.S. on its allies in the region, and I believe the dependence and commitment of its allies to a strong relationship with the U.S., and nowhere is that more evident than in the U.S.-ROK alliance. Obviously, the other thing that hasn't changed is what threatens us, which is the same darkness that has always lurked within people and threatened the community of nations, and that it is ideologies of repression and hatred and regimes and leaders that seek to dominate others through force and divide people from each other. And on the Korean Peninsula, of course, we see the best and the worst of human experience. Just as human beings and nations are capable of extraordinary progress, such as occurred in South Korea, so too are they capable of extraordinary evil, such as in the North. Let me mention three challenges that this strong alliance of ours, I think, face in the years ahead. I'm going to be brief on the first two because I'm sure you've heard about them and you may have questions. The first, obviously, is North Korea. And the most important thing I want to say, which I believe most of us feel, is that I appreciate that the Obama administration has recognized the imperative that there must be no daylight between the U.S. and South Korea in our approach to Pyongyang, and also for breaking out of, for now, I hope it continues, the old pattern in which we were rewarding the Kim family regime for its provocations. I do want to say briefly that I think we need to also pay greater attention to the humanitarian dimension of the North Korean problem. With its ridiculous rhetoric and bizarre behavior, the Kim regime seems to too many to be just a bad joke, but it's a deadly serious reality. Crimes against humanity are taking place every day in North Korea on a scale unlike anything happening anywhere else on earth. And we need to ask ourselves, are we doing enough to help the people who are the victims of this? In this respect, I want to commend the South Korean government for its recent deep efforts to help North Korean asylum to reach safety. I also think the establishment of a formal investigation at the UN crimes against humanity in North Korea was very important, and we must now, including the U.S., support its work. On China, let me just say that I'm troubled, as I know many in Asia are, by some of the ways that China has been using its growing power lately. From a U.S. ROK alliance perspective, there is a growing need for us to be open with each other and to work together in our policy toward China. Because the fact is that both of our countries, U.S. and ROK, welcome a strong and prosperous China, which we recognize is tied to our own prosperity. We also both want to ensure that China's a responsible international actor that respects the rights of its neighbors, regardless of whether they are big or small, and conducts itself according to the rules of the same international order that made possible its own rise, China's own rise. I'm very optimistic that President Park's visit to China this week will advance the hopes that our two countries have for our relations with China, and that in fact an increasingly important Republic of Korea may actually begin to play a bridging role between the U.S. and China. The third challenge I want to mention in closing is perhaps one that has not been discussed. Maybe it has, and it's America itself. It's our role in the world, but particularly in this case in the Asia Pacific and in East Asia. And the question, to state it briefly, is will our country summon the diplomatic, economic, and military will to continue to fill the unique and indispensable role in the Asia Pacific that we have played for these past 60 years, or will America now sequester and retrench ourselves into a kind of regional, perhaps even international passivity? If the latter happens, America, our closest allies, including South Korea, and the world will suffer greatly. History argues strongly against our country yielding its international leadership to others by choice, inaction, or unfunding. And nowhere does history make this argument more convincingly than in the mutually beneficial and remarkably transformative relationship that has existed and grown between the U.S. and Korea over these last 60 years. Thank you very, very much. How did I do?
Bang on, 7 minutes.
Good for a senator.
Senator, thank you very much. Secretary Campbell.
Thank you very much, David, and welcome to everyone in the audience, and particular thanks to Asan Institute. I join Senator Lieberman in commending their great work, and more than anything else, if you look around the room today and tomorrow, you'll see an enormous number of young people, young South Koreans and Americans. Asan Institute has made an investment in education and basically training the next generation in a way that we should all, frankly, commend and support however possible. So it's really our honor to be able to be here today. I also just want to say a note of thanks to Senator Lieberman for his long service. I was honored the Korean government allowed me to participate in his award a few months back, the highest award that Korea gives any leader from another country, a wonderful honor bestowed, and deservedly so, on Senator Lieberman. I just want to make a couple of points. First of all, I'd like to associate myself just as a general level on the recognition that what we are witnessing in North Korea is not just an intractable set of nuclear and issues associated with proliferation and the like. We are witnessing a horrible set of human rights violations that, frankly, I think too many times in the past people have turned a blind eye to. And it's somehow, if you focus on that issue, that you're not acknowledging the importance of the nuclear issue. That is not the case. It is incumbent on us to focus more on the plight of these people, both that live in North Korea and that somehow find their way outside of the country. I think we've all noticed in the last several months, even if you happen to make it out of North Korea, the risks and the travails that you face in surrounding countries as far away as Southeast Asia can be perilous going forward. So just a couple of points about, I like David's overall point about what do recent developments suggest about sort of the direction forward and what we might experience in Asia as a whole. We've had a lot of high-level diplomacy in Northeast Asia, and we have to, of late, we have to recognize how important this diplomacy is at a period where tensions in Northeast Asia are quite high. And in fact, what we have is still a gradual process of economic revitalization in the United States. Europe in the doldrums, Northeast Asia remains the cockpit of the global economy. So steps there have to be taken with that clearly in mind, and that's why this very substantial web of diplomacy has been important. The Sunnyland Summit, a lot has been written and said about it. I think it's great that for the first time in many decades, the U.S. and Chinese leadership were able to sit down in an unstructured way and talk about the issues of mutual import, North Korea, cyber issues, issues related to the management of the global economy. There are a few things that I think are important, though, beyond those critical discussions. One of the things that's already interesting about President Xi is that, unlike previous leaders, he is not shying away from the reference and the terminology of China as a great power. I think in the past there has always been an attempt to say, well, look, we're the largest developing nation, like to be considered a great power in certain circumstances, but not in others. I think the Chinese leadership now is embracing this concept, and I think the question is why and what that means for the United States and countries like South Korea. From our perspective, I think what we want to do, and I think what South Korea wants to do, is enlist China in what we might describe as a 21st century conversation about how we can work together to sustain the norms, the values, if you will, the operating system of Asia that frankly has benefited the countries in Asia, including China, substantially over the course of the last 30 or 40 years. And that's the legal frameworks, the peaceful settlement